Coming up next on Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook.
Talk about Canada.
We're Canada's largest trading partner. So they'll likely get hurt, but before Canada gets hurt, we're going to get hurt. There's a supply chain issue. Wood, for housing, for fences, for whatever it is we were going to use the wood for. Roughly 60% of our lumber comes from Canada. So if we're going to have a tantrum and throw a 100% tariff on lumber, well, you know what's going to happen to housing. We're not going to be using wood, or it's become very expensive.
That's up next. Welcome to Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook, a podcast that cuts through the noise to explain what's really happening in our democracy. Each episode breaks down key issues with insight from policy experts and change makers, giving you clear tips to take action. Whether you're fired up or feeling stuck, you're in the right place to get informed and get inspired, because democracy works best when we all participate.
And thank you again for joining us for another episode of Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook. Today, we have a great guest, Thomas Sowanick. He has spent his career in finance. He has acted as an advisor for major companies like Morgan Stanley and Merrill Lynch. He was the president of his own financial firm, and today he is a global macro strategist. Thank you so much, Thomas Sowanick, for being here with us today.
Hi, Robin.
I met you months ago when I was interviewing people about the state of the economy and where we are right now as a country. And that word tariff keeps getting thrown around. And I thought you are a good person to break it down to the average person. First of all, what is a tariff?
In very simple terms, it's a tax that you didn't have yesterday. You go to whatever your favorite coffee shop is, and Trump throws on a 10% tax on coffee beans. You go in the next day and your coffee price went up 10%. And you say, well, how's that possible? Well, tariffs.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the reasons why this is important for us to discuss, I don't know if the average consumer understands how tariffs work, because the way it's being framed currently is that it is punitive towards the country that is providing the goods and services. But it sounds like it's actually going to be hitting the American consumer more. Can you explain that?
It can be punitive to the country that is exporting to us if there is a substitute good. Let me make it even simpler. A country that exports to the US runs a risk of losing their business if the cost of goods exporting to us becomes too expensive. A tariff can be used as a tool, it can be used as a weapon. In the current environment, I think that the tariffs that are being imposed are being used as a weapon in order to get countries to do certain things that we want them to do. Unfortunately, there's a lagged effect. And so it's the US consumer that pays the first part of the tax. And it may not necessarily be the consumer to begin with. It could be the importing company.
So, for example, China keeps coming up. There seems to be that word tariff thrown around with China. Can you explain to us how that works?
Well, China sells us goods in large part that we don't produce here. Just don't. You go to, this is a bad example, but it works nonetheless. In August, you started seeing Christmas trees at Costco. Where do these Christmas trees come from? They're not made here.
Right.
They're made in China. So China is our largest trading partner, followed by Mexico, Canada. So when we think of, I think our deficit with China runs about $260 billion a year. That's a lot.
Mhm.
And most of that is consumer goods. In fact, almost everything that we import is consumer goods oriented, except for in Canada, we import steel and things of that nature. So the China sends its goods in a ship over the ocean to LA. It sits at the dock. It's loaded with these cavernous bins, and they're not unloaded until the tariff is paid. It's not paid by the Chinese company. It's paid by the U.S. importer. Now, as a business person, you say, you know, it's 10%. It doesn't feel that bad. I'll absorb it because there's too much flux in the news. In other words, one day we have tariffs, one day we don't. One day
Correct.
we have 100% tariffs, one day we don't. So it's hard to adjust your pricing that quickly. So the company will pay the import tariff to get the goods off the ship and then to go through the distribution chain. For the first 4 or 5 months of this year, about 55% of the tariffs were paid by US companies, 37% by consumers. So if you add the numbers, they don't add to 100.
Right.
Somewhere there's like 4 or 5% that got lost in translation. Yeah, it's the fluff that wanders around the dock. So you have to ask yourself, will companies continue to share or eat 55% of the tax burden for the rest of the year until the tariffs are taken off? I think that the short answer is no. It will be passed on to the consumer.
Yes.
So what's being estimated now by economists is that 55% of the tariff that was paid by US companies is going to decrease to roughly 35%. And that difference is going to be picked up by consumers. So there will be a delayed effect on pricing. So, you know, we've gotten through the year pretty easily with respect to inflation, but it's coming. The other part is really sickening, if you will, and I hate to be so dramatic, but we hear on the news, and certain channels are better at it than others, that these exporters, these other countries are paying the tax. They're not.
Yeah, please explain that, because it doesn't sound like the countries that are providing the services, that are exporting the goods, are paying the penalty. Can you explain that?
They because the tariff is collected not at their border, it's collected at our border. Who collects it? The Treasury. How does it collect it? It goes in, they look at the manifest of what's in the ship, and they say, here's everything. It adds up to $3 billion. Somebody pay us $3 billion. Well, it's the importer that pays that $3 billion. Now, sometimes you find that a company, if it's a large enough importer of a particular good, will ask, in this case, China, will ask its whoever is selling it here, will ask them to pick up some of the tariff. So in that sense, yeah, they're paying the price, but just like, you know, the wall, who paid for the wall?
Talk about Canada, because recently there's been another attack on, in terms of the tariff. There has been a statement that tariffs are going to be, pushed on Canada as well. How is that going to affect us? Who has more skin in the game?
Well, we're Canada's largest trading partner. So they'll likely get hurt But before Canada gets hurt, we're going to get hurt.
Mhm.
There's a supply chain issue. You'll remember COVID. We couldn't import wood. We couldn't get wood for
Right.
housing, for fences, for whatever it is we were going to use the wood for. Roughly 60% of our lumber comes from Canada. So if we're going to have a tantrum and throw 100% tariff on lumber, well, you know what's going to happen to housing. We're not going to be using wood, or it's become very expensive. We import a lot of car parts from Canada. We import cars from Canada. We import oil from Canada. So there's a deal made that, the tariffs are going to be limited to X number percent for cars. Okay, that's good. That's a carve out. But now there's something going on with oil, and this is kind of a backdoor tax, if you will, for consumers. And the rule of thumb is that for every penny change in the price of gas, it adds or subtracts $1 billion from the US consumer. So that's a lot of money cumulatively. One penny.
Yeah.
So
1 penny.
1 penny. So now oil prices have gone up from roughly $58 a barrel to 60 some dollars a barrel. And there's talk that it's going to go higher. And we've benefited from lower gas prices.
Yes, that's
Well,
correct.
that benefit may be going away if the oil that we import from Canada is tariffed, and we use that oil for refineries for making gasoline, then the US consumer is going to feel the pinch. And gasoline companies, they don't wait very long before changing prices. Right?
That's right. They fluctuate regularly.
Yeah. So the Canada is going to be hurt economically, and we're going to be hurt either through supply chain bottlenecks or through increase in prices, as an example, gasoline.
And when we're talking about the day-to-day, how is this going to impact something like food prices, going to the grocery store? Because there has been talk on the news that prices have been creeping up and up.
Prices are gnarly. I mean, they just are. The food prices have been going up, no doubt, and we import roughly 40 to 60% of all of our fruits, nuts, and 90% of our avocados from Mexico. So now let's get angry with Mexico. Just envision a world where somebody gets angry at Mexico and they slap on tariffs. Well, that's a perishable good. So they're not going to sit at the dock or just so happens I was in Laredo, Texas a while ago, and to find out that this little town is the largest import station for semi-truck goods coming into the US. Well, all of this it's either trucks or it's food or it's trucks. So stuff that's coming, tomatoes, they're not going to last forever in this truck. So the price increase at the grocery store will be almost instantaneous. And we don't have a lot of substitution at this time of year.
And what does this mean for the holidays? The holidays are right around the corner. People are hosting gatherings, there's holiday dinners, and of course, there's holiday gifts. What is this going to look like for the average consumer?
I saw a report the other day that, and again, this was on the news. I'm not sure where they got this data from, but they had a basket of what would be a typical Thanksgiving dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And they came up with the cost, X dollars. They compared it back to 2019 and it's a lower price. Now, I don't know if it was the grocery store that because of their bulk goods. It seems to me every time I go to the grocery store, things are expensive and you don't have the variety that you used to have. I think it's safe to say that if you're spending on perishable goods, food items, you're going to pay a higher price. We're doing it now. We can't deny that. So why would it get lower in the next couple of weeks?
Mm-hmm.
Then the goods that for Christmas, that's
right.
pre-ordered. Those are all pre-ordered. Now, have they gotten off of the ships? And the answer is that some of them weren't even ordered. So what's this famous quote? You'll just have to live with one doll. So instead of, it's going to be a much slimmer holiday season, but what it portends is that there'll be a better buying season next year, not next Christmas, but in the spring. And it's easy to get very negative, and it's also somewhat easy for me to get positive. And that is that of all the bad things that are happening, we are going to get a change in salt taxes, state and local taxes.
Okay, and what does that mean? Yeah, how does that work, and how does that work in terms of this conversation?
I live in New Jersey,
uh-huh,
and my taxes are relatively high. Let's throw it just for a number. I'm going to say my property tax is $15,000 a year. Prior to the big beautiful bill, there was a cap on how much you could deduct from your state and local taxes, from your federal tax. That was limited to $10,000. All of a sudden, my property tax goes up. I can't write more of it off. My house is becoming more expensive and I haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have the salt tax has been lifted from $10,000 to $40,000 per year. So I'm going to get relief on my property tax to the tune of whatever that my limit is. So 10 to 40, that's $30,000 in state taxes, in property taxes, my community taxes. Well, that's to a consumer, it's going to be like a little windfall.
Well, it depends on where you live, though. It depends on where you live.
Something.
And if you own something, if
Right.
you don't, then it doesn't really make a difference.
Then
you're still hurting.
Yeah, and if you're at a lower income level, you're not paying taxes anyway.
Right.
Right. But you're going to be punished from the tariffs.
Correct.
So the tariffs are in tax terms, it's a regressive tax.
Yes.
And in a broader sense, it's a redistribution of wealth.
Yeah. Can you just explain that a little bit? When you say regressive tax, that means that it's going to hurt people. Well, I'll let you say it. You're the financial expert.
Well, if you're 25 years old and you work at McDonald's, and somebody else is 25 years old and they work at IBM, one makes $100,000, one makes $25,000 a year. Both commute the same distance to work. The person that works at McDonald's isn't making $100,000. They're making $25,000. So if their food prices went up, their electricity prices went up, their gasoline prices went up, the same dollar amount as it did for the one that's making $100,000, in proportion, the person that makes less is paying more in taxes. That's regressive. We're taking it more away from the less fortunate. So in the US, what we're doing is that we're slapping on tariffs. Either the company is going to pay it and the revenue goes to the Treasury Department, or the consumer is going to pay it and the revenue is going to go to the Treasury Department. Redistribution of wealth away from the private sector to the public sector. And what are we going to do with, will the government do the right thing with the increased revenue? The irony about all of this, and we don't hear it on the news at all, is that this increase in revenue is because of us.
What do you mean by that?
The increase in the tariffs, which generates $360 billion a year, that's being paid by either US consumers, US corporations, or a combination of both. It's not as if foreign countries are giving us that money. We're giving it to the government because we want to consume what we're accustomed to.
And so I was going to say, then really, what are we getting out of it aside from consuming what we're accustomed to? But again, these tariffs are framed as something that's punitive to specific countries. And from all of the examples you've given me, it doesn't sound like we're getting a lot out of it. And let me throw one more thing at you. What about this? Well, if we don't get it from that country, we'll just have it made here in America. Tell me about that argument.
It's not an argument. An argument, you need to have some basis. There's no basis for this. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what we make in the U.S. anymore. I just don't. I quit looking at labels. So, but if we're directed not to buy things from China, then an entrepreneurial country will say, I'll pick up that slack and I will make what China was making and sell it to the US. Nike is a good example. Nike used to get roughly 80% of its shoes from China. Things got expensive, imports. China is persona non grata in the US. Nike goes, okay, let's go to Vietnam. We can actually make it cheaper there, the shoes. Well, you say, why don't they come here? Because they can't afford to build a shoe here. And if it costs $200 in labor to build a shoe here, and it costs $200 to buy the shoe at the store, then it's not going to happen. It's still too expensive. Other societies, they think about, they don't use credit cards, they don't have mortgages, but they have two houses. All right. You say, well, how does this happen? Well, we choose what it is we want to buy. It's here we have, it's not that we choose, we just have too many chooses to choose from. So we're always buying.
Too many choices.
And we're always buying. That's the problem. We don't know how to do without. And to change that consumption pattern is going to require not tariffs. It's going to require perhaps a generation to say no more.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something you said earlier too about not wanting to be super, super bleak. I want to try to have a glimmer of hope in terms of what we can do as consumers in order to brace ourselves for what's to come and to equip ourselves for how to manage now. Part of this program, my podcast, is a playbook. I call it the Civic Power Playbook because I want to know from experts like yourself, how can people empower themselves to weather this storm? What can they do to make it easier? What are 3 simple tips that you would give someone?
The first 2, which just flow out of my mouth,
Yes.
is save regardless of how small it is. save $25 a week, save $50 a week, save $100. And cumulatively, it adds up. And this is really important for underprivileged people that don't believe they can save. They can. And the easiest way to save is not to borrow. So if I'm not using my credit card, by the way, I'm being charged 30% for it because I'm a good credit, right? So the candy bar, I really need that candy bar. Here, put it on my card. They charge me 30% for that instead of $1. It's $1.30. Now I have to pay that bill I consumed, and I still haven't saved a nickel. So if just to change a little bit of the mindset that credit is good for emergencies, it's not good for livelihood. That's important. The other is to be respectful of what you need to consume. And you don't need to buy the latest and the greatest. You don't need to buy the new model that you still have the old model for. You haven't used it. Like I know I like rib roasts, and I know that I can't afford them. But twice a year, we have a grocery store that has them on sale for 60% off. So I know twice a year, I'm going to buy a rib roast. And that to me is smart consuming.
Yes.
I don't, my desire to eat that roast in April doesn't do me any good because it's going to cost me X number of dollars more. But just being aware of where you spend your money, simple budgeting is so important. I think it was Warren Buffett that said this. He said, it's not how much you save, it's how much you don't borrow.
Yes.
And to go back to the SALT tax,
Yes.
just about everybody that owns a house has a mortgage.
Correct.
And you were limited on your interest expense, your property expense, your taxes, your state taxes. All of that couldn't be more than 10,000.
Right.
Well, that's being goosed up to 40,000 for this year, and that's going to help a lot. But remember, it's the fact that you had that mortgage to begin with created the pain. Now, so if you can, pay down more of your mortgage, not buy that leased car or not lease that car, that's just money in a hole. Right? After 3 years, you have nothing. Buy a used car. I guess maybe I'm old enough to know that, a fast car, a fancy car gets to be the same place as a cruddy car. And it doesn't have to be ugly, but you know what I'm saying is that
yes, of course.
Be not just frugal, just be smart with what we do with our money. And I promise you, these kids that are refusing to go to college or never thought they would ever go to college and they work at McDonald's, they can save money.
Do you think that we are being forced we're going to come to a point where we are going to be forced to make these decisions? Because these are things we've heard, so many of us have heard. You spend wisely, have a budget, don't delay instant gratification. We've heard these things before, but now this seems different.
It does seem different because somewhere and let me get more pessimistic. We've also heard over the years that our deficits can't keep growing. My grandchildren are going to end up paying for it. Their grandchildren. We may be at the cusp where our grandchildren aren't going to pay for it. we're going to pay for it.
Mhm.
Right. So we've got Social Security that is going to go bust
That's right.
in a few years, which means that my children are not going to be able to rely on Social Security. And this goes right back to the heart of savings. My grandchildren, my children are going to need their own nest egg. And we cannot teach them hard enough and fast enough that this safety net is gone for all intents and purposes. And that you're going to have to make decisions. The government's going to have to make decisions. If we're the largest debtor nation in the world, and the world says we're not going to lend to you anymore, then our interest rates are going to go much higher than anybody has ever seen. So a mortgage at 6% sounds expensive now. If it goes to 10%, it's really going to be expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And the dollar, which just about everybody believes is going to be replaced by something soon, and it will be, there's no doubt about that. But all of these things, the change in the value of the dollar, the size of our deficit, all of this trickles down to a US that will be less comfortable in its own shoes.
Mm.
It's going to be so much more expensive to import. Forget the tariffs, because the value of the dollar will go down. So everything that we imported from, pick a place, a nice place, Bermuda, right? Everything we imported from Bermuda is going to get more expensive, regardless of the tariff, just because we have less dollars.
What can we do about it now? I mean, you talked about the longer term things such as saving and budgeting and being wise in terms of consumption, but how are we supposed to be hopeful?
Well, I don't know how you're supposed to be hopeful. What I know is that whether as an individual or as a government, you can't keep kicking the can down the road. At some point, the bank is going to knock on your door and say, "Can I please have the keys to your car?" Or the keys to your house. A foreign government is going to say to us, "Please give us a couple $1 billion worth of your land. You owe it to us." No, 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 no. You invested with us. No, we lent you money. It's again, nobody knows when, but I think you said it feels different.
Yes.
Maybe the when is much closer than what we all actually think. And I remember when I bought my first car, it was like $3,700 or something. Now to buy that first car, it's at least 40,
Right.
if not more. And things have gotten better, right?
Well, one last thing, then how do you stay hopeful? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic about anything?
I am.
Good. Tell me.
I'm because I grew up in an era where people felt empowered when they didn't. I grew up in the Vietnam era, and back then we had the Vietnamese War, and nobody believed in it. People were dying. High school friends were dying, and there was this groundswell of protest. And I say to my kids, "Why don't you protest? You know, I listen to your complaints, but why don't everybody get together and do it all at once?" We have this No King's Day, right? Well, maybe we should do that every day for a while, instead of the government shutting down, why not shut down the government? And and again, I'm not a radical.
No.
I'm just saying is that, if we want change, we have to make it happen. And
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean at the voting booths. That's what everybody tells you. You got to vote. Really? I probably need to stand up and say something. And maybe get my colleagues to stand up and say something. Maybe, just maybe, change the way that I consume.
Yes.
Simple things.
Yeah. And we have more power than we think.
Some people have a lot of power, more than what they should.
Yes, but the average person, the person who is just doing the day-to-day, who is trying to get by the day-to-day, when you're overwhelmed and you're trying to figure out, am I going to be able to pay my rent and my light bill and my groceries and my medicine? It seems daunting.
But and that becomes, this is where, we all have to pull together. Multi-generation housing. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's how people live in Asia. That's how people live in Europe, because the families they're built that way. We may need to do it here. And maybe we have less friction because of it, as opposed to what's going on now. So yes, I'm optimistic that we can get enough anger to make change.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much,
Thank
Thomas
you.
Sowanick. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Yes. See you sometime in Alexandria.
And now it's time for Thomas's top power plays. First, save. No amount is too small. Also, avoid debt as much as possible. And he also says spend wisely. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you're feeling a little more hopeful, a little less stuck, and maybe even inspired to take action, because democracy does work when we all participate. Want more? You can go to my website, democracydoes.com, and sign up to get our newsletter, alerts on when our next episode drops, and as a bonus, you'll get a free community engagement toolkit with ideas on how to get involved at your comfort level. Let's get in the game together. Until next time, I'm your host, Robin Hamilton.